I think the secret sauce is that you are consistent in what you are talking about, right? So like what I do is I talk
Yeah.
about how to make companies more efficient, identify this efficiency, and scale it. I do so by being very authentic. I talk about the
Yeah.
failures. I talk about the successes. I'm very, very open about very uncomfortable things. I want to build trust with the people who, in the end, give me their money in some way, right? Like whether these
Yeah.
are the clients, whether these are the paid subscribers on the website, whether these are people who are just engaging with my stuff, exposing me potentially to others. This is product-led growth. Yeah, it's a cycle. It's the cycle of PLG life. Cue music, dramatic music.
Well, welcome to the Product Quest podcast. Thanks for joining us on our journey to better understand innovation and product strategy. My name is Scott Burleson, and joining me as always, my co-hosts Jan Vermouth and Jonathan Edwards. Well, today we welcome our very special guest and our first repeat guest, Leah Tharin. And well, where do we begin? Last January, I was captivated by Leah's writing on a topic I knew nothing about, product-led growth, even as though, and I hate to even admit this, as I was leading product for a product called Blueprinter Software, but I was not familiar with product-led growth. But in getting up to speed, I found Leah's writing to be concise, educational, entertaining, sometimes irreverent, often, I'll say usually funny, but always useful. I'll say always entertaining also. I've very much enjoyed them, but I'm not the only one. At that time, she had 12,000 followers on LinkedIn. I remember that. And I think it was around 15 by the time she was on her episode. And I correctly predicted on that episode, by the time we connected again, it'd be over 30. And we're at 34. And by the time all you crazy people listening to this, I have no doubt, I really expect this. It'll be over 40. And as a result, Leah's created some interesting opportunities for herself, and we are certain to chat about that. Well, Leah Tharin, welcome home. We're happy to have you back on the Product Quest podcast.
I am so happy to be on my favorite podcast of all times. This is so nice. No, for real. Like the only thing that's missing still is like a fire somewhere, like a bonfire or something. Like we're just like and Jan is playing the guitar.
Yeah.
Oh, no, better not me. I think you're more suited to that.
It is so good to be here. No, it's crazy. It feels like years because so much has happened.
Yeah.
And a lot has happened. Yeah. But thank you for the introduction. That was very kind.
Yeah. Well, I truly mean every word of it. And, sort of as a result, I feel like I've had a front row seat to at least part of your solopreneurship journey, if you use that term. Let's talk about that. How did you start? What was your catalyst? I don't know if you use the term side hustles, but just for conversation, what was sort of your catalyst for beginning that, along with what was a full-time gig?
So maybe I can introduce myself with the past. So what I used to do and now what I'm trying to do. So I'm not new to advising, right? So I made recently an announcement that I'm going to go full-time advising because I'm going to lay down my job at Jua. And this was always planned, but not at that time, like not that fast. Let's put it that way. Yeah. And what I used to do in the past was I had a full-time role and always also 2 advising mandates on the side. Nothing big, like 8 hours per month. That was the time that I gave myself to advise companies on the side. And it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of money, and it was very, very successful as well for me. And what happened was that I got under pressure from 2 positions in the same time. And the first one is you get just much more inbound from the sides, right? Like people enjoy your stuff, and then they ask like, "Hey, can you advise?" And I'm just like, no. Because I'm not someone that is overworked in that sense, but I'm very aware of what I say no to not be overworked. I think that's the first part. And then the second thing was we did a very interesting pivot at Jua from the company strategy. And I kind of helped pivot myself out of there. So the company is now heading into a direction that is absolutely 100% correct. But at the same time, this is not where I want to be from my own personal growth perspective. And, I got to be honest, like I had a lot of hesitation whether I should quit because it doesn't look good in your CV to some degree, right? And so forth. And then actually I was talking with my CEO about this, and he was just like, hey, we should better do it now rather than in 2 years when you're like, when the decision becomes even harder. Because if you don't see yourself where the company is going right now, which is in energy trading, which I find extremely interesting, but it's just not where product-led growth is for me. So then the decision was relatively clear. So now I made the jump. And the scary thing is like nothing material that has changed so far. It's like, I start to go over my bank accounts. How long can I sustain this if the market breaks away? Or I have no reason to be scared at all, but I am. So I guess that's a good summary of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Only the paranoid survives. That's what my wife tells me.
Your wife, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know whether that's true, but yeah, sure.
There is something though in the consulting world. It's like we can, well, what my grandfather used to say, if you ask him, well, how are things going? Oh, we've had a lot of rain. Or how are things going? It's been awfully dry. How are things going? It's been really hot. And I feel like it was always terrible. And I feel like in consulting is sort of that way, in that either, wow, I'm buried, there's so much business, or man, things are so slow. It's like you just can never, there's never things are great. I have a perfect, because there's so much uncertainty about pipeline and things coming in, and you hate, I don't know if I took a note about what you mentioned. You're conscious of what you say no to. I find that hard to say no to really anything that's sort of revenue generating.
No, absolutely not. No. Like, this is something that I also started to learn in business itself, right? So like I run myself like a product, and you have to say no to the stuff that keeps you from the long term. Now, I'm not going to say no to revenue if it just flatters in the house, right? That's right. But like, you always pay some price.
Yep.
You always do. And if you onboard the wrong customer, they will keep you distracted. If you think like, I can maybe load one more client on top of this, you're probably already at capacity. So, I mean, the alternative was to just burn out, to take too much on and think like that I can handle this in some way, and then quit. And then go for another 3 months, burn my bridges with my old employer. And then, that was just not an option. And but yeah, I mean, it is difficult. Like 10 years ago, I think if you would have told me that I'm going to be an advisor or consultant, filthy words, absolutely filthy. But here we are. I think I have to call myself that now.
Well, there's a choice, but I think you might run into the risk that you will be called from other people that way, but you can try to kind of push it. I mean, I'm in a very similar position. I think if you would have asked me 5 or 10 years, well, 5 years ago even, if I would do anything like things that I'm doing now, let alone be on a podcast, I would have never said that I would be doing something like this. So, but in hindsight, it's quite okay. So it worked.
There's a very interesting thing from behavioral science about this. When we try to imagine how the future is, or like how we changed compared to the past. So like, let's say we go back 5 to 10 years, it's very easy for people to kind of recognize how much they changed, right? So like, I'm not the same person that I was 5 years ago, not the same person that I was 10 years ago. My God, I don't want to be in the same room as that person, right?
Yes.
But it is interesting when we try to imagine ourselves on how we will be in 5 to 10 years, there we start to struggle, right? So like backwards, it seems to work extremely well. But forward, it does not really work, right? So like what we think is, okay, like if I'm going to do these things, we still kind of apply the person that we are today, rather than I will also develop with this, right? So like, and then I will be fine. But you cannot imagine this future state first before you kind of know whether you can take a challenge. And for me, a lot of the things that I have learned in my consulting business and also about product-led growth, so I advise on product-led growth and growing companies in that sense, is that sometimes you just have to trust that you have the talent in-house within your abilities without knowing the way, and you'll figure it out. it really sounds a bit esoteric, like, oh, the universe will figure it out. It's not what I mean. I just mean, like, if you have talented people and there is a way to find, you will find it even if you do not see it from the get-go, maybe. And that is currently my life's philosophy, I'd say.
Sounds great. I feel like there's for me, that's connected to just the basic idea of growth. Growing some kind of, it implies that something is bigger than, well, it's smaller now than it is going to be afterwards, right? That somehow seems to be essentially the idea of growth. And probably that fits also to challenges and personal stuff. So you will always be a bit smaller than the challenge that you take on. Otherwise, it would also not be a challenge. No. But that's kind of, I think so there's always this element of stuff that you want to do. That's somehow, maybe that's just me, but there's always a mix of it being scary and exciting. Of stuff that you really care about. It can go wrong, and then at least I'm scared of that. But there's always that mix. I think, I don't know.
No, I think being afraid of what goes wrong is kind of changing with age. Like the reasons why something can go wrong. Like I give less and less. I'm not sure what I could swear on this podcast.
Oh, anything's good. You're good.
All right. So I give less and less shits about what people think about me. Gradually, right? So like this is a gradual process. I'm not where my other colleagues are at, but I'm starting to think less about that. I care more about the outcomes and I care less about the money. Now, that does not mean that I'm just going to reduce my prices. That's not what I mean. I'm very firm in what I do, but like it is an awfully solitude experience if you don't have challenges in your life, like, like something where you can just feel like you're challenged. And that is a strength in some ways, for sure, because you grow faster, but it also sometimes becomes a weakness, because I always remember that when I post on LinkedIn basics about product-led growth, like the general frameworks, for instance, we on which I talked about already 150, 200, 300 times.
Right.
People love it, right? So like most of the people that have come to my stuff, they love it. They're like, oh my God, this is so great. And I'm just like, I wish I could talk about something else now sometimes, like not a different topic, but more in depth on specific topics. And I can do that with my clients, and the people that need operational help, of course, because everybody is different. But it is a finicky thing, isn't it? It's constantly a pull of good and bad. Yeah.
But can I just out of interest? Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, there's I remember before you talking about a couple things, like earlier in your career. I forget your exact word. I think I do remember exact words. I think you said you found some things you suck at, if I remember that correctly.
That sounds like me, yeah.
Or maybe you didn't enjoy, but you found yourself and that was sort of a catalyst that pushed you forward to find things you did enjoy more. And the other thing we talked about before is imposter syndrome. And the thing that feels difficult to know, like on the show, like American Idol or whatever, the singing shows, invariably there'll be somebody that just thinks they're an amazing singer and they go out there and they're just terrible. And then like, that's my nightmare. That's me, with that, like, I guess that's the essence of imposter syndrome, really, where you're afraid about this way you perceive yourself. The expertise you perceive is just sort of this fantasy.
This is a very interesting thought. And I think there's an interesting thing happening there in general when we evaluate the performance of people. So what we do when we laugh about people who suck, that think that they're good, what we're really doing is we're trying to put an objective measure on them. Maybe they've never heard that they suck, right? Or they don't want to hear about it or whatever. But there is something nefarious about laughing at people, because what we do is we really reinforce our own inferior kind of complex about the world, right? Because we now feel like, oh, that's not me, right? So like by laughing at someone and pointing our fingers, we kind of separate ourselves from this group. And it is weird because in some way we love binary systems, like winning and losing. Like you have a soccer match. There's one team winning, the other one is losing, or there's a tie, but like there's nothing in between, right? So like it's either one of these three outcomes. Weightlifting, whatever it is, like we love to put numbers on stuff, right? So like you're good if you lift 200 kilograms or like 50 or 100. And I think one of the reasons of this is that it is very easy to compare these numbers, but it is very hard to determine how hard someone worked for specific things.
Yeah.
Whereas this is what we actually should reward in people, right?
Yeah.
It's not like where you end up. It's more like, okay, how much effort did you spend on something?
Yeah.
And I think this is where an imposter syndrome comes from. It's a dark side of our psyche, not just like that we think ourselves are like this, but we also judge others based on this. All of us do this. I do this too. I'm just trying to be aware of it whenever I can.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember this experience with, I went to see a concert with a very good musician, and I didn't enjoy the concert that much. And I was judging and didn't think it was that good. And this person actually was extremely complimenting of the concert and of the singer, and saying it was how great it was and how courageous you had to be to just go on stage and produce something. And it really made me think. And I've noticed also that people who criticize a lot other people often will not themselves do something, because in the end, through criticizing others, you criticize yourself too. You're hard on others and on yourself, and vice versa. So I think that's a really, really good point.
You kind of deny a future of yourself to be a beginner again, right? At something, because like, hey, look, I'm laughing at this person that is shit, and then people say like, yeah, but like that's not the point. It's the point that she's just standing there and that she's so self or like unaware of herself. And no, you're absolutely right. By criticizing these things, we kind of deny ourselves to be a fool sometimes in the future as well. And I don't know. Yeah. There we go. That was the philosophical part of the discussion, but I totally agree. Yeah.
It reminds me of something. When we started this podcast to reach out to these guys, I laid out a G.K. Chesterton quote to see if I could remember it. A thing worth doing is worth doing poorly, which I interpret that to mean sort of give yourself permission to be a beginner. It's like, not because you don't have some expertise. So, I mean, we totally knew nothing. We know a little more now than we did then, but we still are, beginners, I think, or I don't know. We're somewhere along that continuum of developing sort of our skills, if you will. But we didn't let the fact that we know nothing about what we're doing at all to stop us. But I think I like that quote, because I think you're right. I think when we this fear that we're going to get so far over our skis, or this imposter syndrome thing, it can really be paralyzing and just stop. Then it sort of stops the growth process. And what do? You retreat back into what you know, what's comfortable. And you're probably not going on your own outside of the big company gig.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. Let's talk about let's going back to when you were you still had that full-time job, but when you were doing that, and also you were starting to do the side hustles. I'm wondering about your strategy to sort of how you fence when you're doing one and when you're doing the other. You mentioned one thing about you limit the number of hours, but what else did you find yourself doing? It occurs to me that a difficulty might be, it's not just the hours, but sort of mind share, like what you're thinking about. But how did you manage that?
So that's a very good point. There's a very specific limit that we have in terms of context switching and what we can do. And when I talk about 8 hours for advising every month that I took on, that does not mean that I have 8 different mandates for 1 hour a month. So there is a limit to the amount of context that you can switch as well. For me, I would say if you have a full-time role, loading on another 2 serious, serious mandates where you have to just like stay every week, you have to come up with something and you have to give insights. That is probably the limit, because there will be times where you have to decide where your focus is going to be, and it always should be on your full-time role. It's just what it is.
Right.
So for me, the full-time role always came first, then the advising mandates, and I knew that I cannot accept to under-deliver on these advising mandates as well. So what can I do? I can only reduce the number of advising mandates that I have. everything else that came afterwards, my personal holidays, LinkedIn, my own Substack or whatever, that is stuff that I can scale without my full-time role or the consulting mandates to suffer. Because as I said, like I'm running myself like a product-led growth product. This is what I'm talking about. My prices are public. I'm public about what I offer. I give a lot of stuff for free. So this word of mouth from these clients, like also having my students, for instance, also in the cohort classes and so forth, this is incredibly important. And if this does not if the minimum quality for those things that really matter for me cannot be guaranteed, then you have to cut down before, right? So like you need to have some kind of safety margin. Because, in an early stage startup like Jua, things go wrong all the time. You can have a week where there's nothing happening, and then suddenly like, holy shit, everything just breaks loose. Specifically now in machine learning, every 2 weeks, there's a new breakthrough that is absolutely mind-blowing. It's just crazy. So you need to limit yourself, because otherwise you do start to burn out. So having said that, there's an important context here for people to understand, in that, I'm an executive in my full-time role. So I have a lot of freedom that normal operative people in that sense maybe not have. And I'm saying this because I worked myself there very, very clearly. So when I started advising, I was back in an operative role as I think I was staff, or I don't know, staff PM again or whatever. And I did not want to have some kind of head off role or whatever. And I started there to advise people for free, right? So like I could always scale that down, because if you don't collect money for it, it's easier to also say no, right? So like I started to experiment, I started to coach people, I had a lot of one-on-one relationships and so forth. So I slowly scaled it up. And when I switched my job, I already had a considerable following on LinkedIn. And then when Andreas asked me whether I want to come to Jua, there was no homework or whatever that I had to do. It was just about like, hey, when can you start? Here's the challenge that we have from the business. What do you think about it? Because they already knew what I'm about, because I gave all my material out on the outside. And I negotiated very clearly with them, hey, like I have an advising business on the side. Do you trust me to run this so it's not to the detriment of the company? And he said, yeah, of course. Absolutely. Yeah. The only condition that we have is that you always put, if I have new clients, that I put it out to the board first. So I have to report to the board when I get new advising clients. This is just to avoid competitor clauses, that kind of stuff. I am also being, by my clients, they run due diligence on me, just because of at some price you become a big position in their budget, right? So like they run due diligence on you. They do make reference calls sometimes. And it's just different, like in the details. But the gist of it is you have to make sure that when you think you can take on 4, you can probably take on 2. Have to separate yourself in that sense. I'm not sure that answers your question, but don't take on too many different mandates, because the context switching also costs.
Right. The other thing I was wondering about is, what you answered, is sort of how you manage expectations, with the full-time employer. It sounds like just a lot of transparency. And in this case, you had the advising when you joined, so it was sort of part of the, and you kept them apprised as you went along. So there's, the folks that are attracted to product management in general, or maybe a little more entrepreneurial minded anyways. So I don't think you see lots of folks in former product managers, sort of branching out. And I think that's just how their brains wired. So I imagine there's a lot of people, product managers, very experienced, listening to this with similar desires, put it that way. And I thought that was a really interesting thing you said about you started taking on some clients for free. And that sounds like a great idea. What occurs to me is, again, you can sort of manage the amount of work. They can't really ask for anything or be unhappy with the deliverables. They're not paying. So it gives you a little flexibility to sort of experiment a bit. It's
your first MVP version, right? Like this is the classical product cycle that we have. It's my first MVP version of myself. What are my gaps, right? Like what do I suck at? So the moment I charge, I kind of guarantee that I know specific things. So it is in my interest as well that as soon as I do charge money and I feel like I'm not having leverage again, that I proactively cancel the relationship, because I should have impact. Because if I feel like I'm not going to have impact, I'm not just going to charge them for months and months and months.
Yeah.
Because that leads to bad word of mouth, and it's just not good, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Let's talk about some nuts and bolts things. Something I'm very curious about.
Mm-hmm.
Your marketing strategy or your content strategy, or however you word it. I'm curious about your sort of systems, your methods. How do you manage your queue of items to work on? What's your sort of writing schedule? Because you're very prolific.
So what I'm going to talk about is what I did 2 months ago, because since then I've just been recycling stuff and I've been running on the down low. Let's put it that way. So I had a couple of health problems in the last couple of weeks. So this is why, like my stuff is now a little bit up and down. What you do start to notice once you have much more content, just as I do, right? Like I have a huge content bank in that sense, and I can recycle some stuff. So I can go back to articles that are 6 to 7 months old. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but like if you write as much as me, you develop a lot yourself as well in these 6 to 7 months. So this is a long time ago for me, right? Like I don't even have an article that is a year old. All of them are deleted. Like it's just like I cannot look at them anymore. But what's cool about it is I have good statistics on what did work with clients, or like not clients, sorry, like with my followers, with the people that have subscribed to my stuff. And the good thing is sometimes I can take these old articles and rework them. Sometimes I read them and I'm like, what the heck was going through your head? You could have said that much better, right? So, and then I reworked them. Like a lot of the frameworks that I did, are actually like 4th or 5th iterations.
Yeah.
And I started to notice that this is why it's so hard for people to copy me. You can copy my stuff one-on-one, right? Like you can just copy whatever I write. That's fine, but like it will not perform on LinkedIn. Like I think the secret sauce is that you are consistent in what you are talking about, right? So like what I do is I talk about how to make companies more efficient, identify this efficiency, and scale it. I do so by being very authentic. I talk about the failures. I talk about the successes. I'm very, very open about very uncomfortable things, like pricing and some other thing, like which I was not the first, by the way. I just copied someone else. But this is what it is, right? So like I want to build trust with the people who in the end give me their money in some way, right? Like whether these are the clients, whether these are the paid subscribers on the website, whether these are people who are just engaging with my stuff, exposing me potentially to others. This is product-led growth all the way around. So, it's a cycle. It's the cycle of PLG life. Cue music, dramatic music.
I was sort of scribbling down your attributes. Well, there's a couple of things that build off of. One is that in my own writing, I don't recycle as much as I probably should, and so it's just like I don't really have a system, and so I think that impacts my productivity. But I was sort of scribbling down your notes about the attributes of a really effective post. I'm sure I missed some things, but I wrote down is you want to build trust, you want to be authentic, share successes, share uncomfortable things, and then then I think I missed something, but I feel like you said like you have certain core. Well, let me just ask you. Let me read those again. Tell me what you would add to that. You want to build trust. You want to be authentic, share successes, share uncomfortable things. What else is on our short list of a great LinkedIn post?
Okay, so let's talk about why I can go full-time advising. Like, why do I have this freedom right now that pays me this much money that I can actually do this? Because this is the heart of the question that you're asking me right now.
Yeah.
Like, what is the methods to get there?
Yeah.
And so this is a business, right? So like this is my own personal business, but it fundamentally works also like every other business where multiple people are working in.
Yeah.
If we are thinking about what is the long-term success of any business, and there's a combination of 2 factors. The first one is how much work you put into it, and the second factor is how efficient you put it into. Like how efficient is the stuff that you're putting into, right?
Yeah.
These 2 things together give you the impact that you have in the market. Now, you hopefully are also doing it in a market that is big enough that's completely to the side, right? So what I mean with that is, let's say you are a tennis player and you go to practice every week for 5 hours. That's the amount of work that you put in every week. 5 hours. It's a flat number. Now, if you start to listen to tennis podcasts, or like you start to study theory or study material and so forth, and you make these 5 hours more efficient on top. Now, you could say, okay, like this study is also like putting in work, but that's not what I mean, right? So this is the actual work of doing something. And the other side is the work of making it efficient. The problem that we have when we're looking at this kind of stuff is that we completely over-index on how important efficiency is, because that's the shiny thing. So no amount of reading books, no amount of reading podcasts will get you further in any area of life unless you do practice at the start. And we tend to overestimate this by a big margin. So what you were, like, for instance, I could have answered your question before with, here's how you write a hook. Then you should not post every 4 hours. Then you should do this. I post at 7 a.m. in the morning, and then I do this, and then I take a coffee, and then I jump into an ice bath, and then I don't know, then I slap someone around the corner or whatever. But these are very writable topics, right? So like these frameworks of tactical things are because they're applicable, right? So what you can do is you can learn how to be efficient on things. But let's say you were extremely efficient, but you just don't train a lot. Let's say you're consuming so much stuff about tennis every day for 5 hours, and that makes you 20% more efficient than others. Well, it turns out if you do not practice 5 hours like the other person, then these 20% don't mean that much. And this is obviously dependent on the activity that you do, but this is the same thing for writing and also having a content empire like I do, or whatever you want to call it. The one thing you have to figure out is consistency. If you feel like you have a problem with motivation, there's no efficiency framework that is going to get you there. Because what we do think is, we think that, oh, well, if I just had a couple of tips and it would work, then I would get the attention. Yeah. And then it would kind of work, right? Like then I would be motivated every day to do so. Yep. That is absolute garbage. I have multiple posts every week that have more engagement than 99.9% of people on LinkedIn. Does this motivate me? No, it doesn't. It doesn't, because what do? I compare myself to people who have more, right? Some of my best friends, they're just far better writers. They just have better material around this stuff. So the question that you have to answer yourself is, how do I create a habit? So how do I become consistent in writing? Now, everybody tells you, yeah, consistency is key, but they don't tell you how to do it. Right? It's not, consistency is not like, oh, you know, I get up at 7 in the morning and then I write. The problem is, how do I get up at 7 in the morning and do write this kind of stuff? So I have a couple of tactical frameworks for this, but like those are the ones that kind of work for me. So what I do know is I am the most productive when I switch my phone off. Yeah. At 7 o'clock. No, not 7. Like at 8 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. My system also has its notifications completely switched off, and I just need to create some kind of environment that works this way. So what I did back in August when I started completely new, so like last year, right? Yeah. Not 2 days ago. Right. At least on posting on LinkedIn and getting this entire train going, was to commit myself to a very, very, very specific thing that is not movable. And that was, I'm going to post once a day for the next 6 months, at least once, no matter the quality. This is important, right? So like when we release something, when we push something out, we have 3 things that we can alter. We can alter the quality of it. We can alter the time that we deliver it on. Yeah. Or the scope of it. Yeah. And you should only define one thing of these, because you will fail on the other 2 anyways. So I always told myself, I'm going to post, no matter how embarrassing it is, no matter how late it is, I'm just going to post something, even if it's embarrassing. Yeah. So you can reduce the quality. Maybe sometimes you post something embarrassing or whatever, but like you do post, because what that does is you're getting your exercise time in. And that worked for me as a habit creation mechanism, because with time, you also start to become better. And you also start to kind of notice that these specific things do not work, right? Specific things do not work. And then I can start to read up on how do I do them better. And this is why people are completely over focusing on, oh, how do I write hooks? How do I do this? How do I do that?
Yeah.
None of the people who are consistent are asking you this, but they are the ones that actually could, right? So
Right.
that's the kind of funny thing.
Yeah.
These tactical frameworks are way too shiny. What you should figure out is habit building and how to be consistent, because you can move mountains if you are consistent, right? Like, I mean, I've proven it. Elena proves it. Like all these people that are also on LinkedIn are proving it every day. You can go so much further because most people don't know how to create habits. It's not the efficiency. It's not whether they're writing better hooks or nothing. That helps once you are consistent, because I have a lot more time that can be made efficient. But if you don't post, your efficiency of 80% means nothing.
Wow.
Yeah. I also really like that you, not with a word, you mentioned algorithms or like hashtags and how do you structure it and blah, blah. No, it's just, and I really think you're spot on there. I mean, but this is even outside of LinkedIn, this is one of the key challenges that is so hard to figure out how to change your habits and how to kind of I can go to the gym every day for a week. I think I can probably, I think I can do that. But the second week is like the difficult, once I lapse, what do I do? Then I'm usually the guy, I'm out. Like I can stick to a diet for a couple of days. And then once I think with a friend, I'm sitting there with a beer and think, okay, fine. The same is true with content creation. I can for a month, I can really produce. And then there's a project and I've got a lot to do. And then I lapse.
Yeah, it's not your priority anymore.
Out the window goes the habit.
It's not your priority.
Okay, look, yeah, fair enough.
Here's the thing. No, but like we had this discussion last time as well. I just remember this now. So here's the thing.
That's true.
What determines how good you can become theoretically in a skill? What determines that? It's your talent, right? So talent determines how high you could go in a specific thing. It would be foolish to say that Roger Federer was not a talented tennis player.
Right.
So that determines the ceiling of your skill. What determines how far you will go? It's the number one thing. It's passion. Passion or force. So if you don't have a child that is passionate about something, then you will be forced by your parents. Now we know how that turns out. That's usually not a good thing, right? But if you're passionate, then you can reach your ceiling much more likely. Now, most people will never reach their ceiling, but talent, I don't know a single talented person that is good in what they do without the work that they put in on the start.
Yeah.
And we don't have to be the best in everything. Like you don't have to be the number one worldwide. Like you don't have to be an Arnold Schwarzenegger, for fuck's sake. Like, I mean, his documentary was interesting, by the way, on Netflix. But you don't have to. It is by and large, unfortunately, the amount of work. And because of the social media effect that we have, we tend to kind of play down the sweat, or we overplay it in a comical way, like to the outside, in ways that makes it very hard to judge from the outside. Okay, like what went into this? A good example is if you have a family, right? So like all these families that are super happy on Instagram, like, they're 5 children, everything is happy. And you just know between this picture and the last one, there was a lot of fights and a lot of stuff went wrong. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just we're very, very selective in what we want to show to people, because then we start to believe that everybody is like this and nobody is like this.
Right.
So, you just have to ignore what's on the outside, put it in, and then you can worry about your algorithm if you want to.
What I find this is a personal grudge of mine with movies. A lot of the times you watch a movie, I watched one recently about Stephen Hawking, the famous physicist. And a lot of movies will basically push the idea forward that efficiency, basically talent, is what matters. And in this particular movie, the character Stephen Hawking solves some amazing problem half asleep, like in his sleep, and comes back the next day and is like the best, the best in the world of and all that. And it's very disturbing, and I find it's a very disturbing message also to communicate to young people. One film I thought did not talk about, is very interesting for that reason, is Whiplash. which is a film about a drummer a student drummer in New York who is learning how to play jazz drums. And basically the whole film is about what usually films would like be a fade to black or something. And the whole film's about that 5 seconds where, so it's all about how he trains hard. And I found that was a really interesting film in that respect. I wanted to ask you, with respect to what you're doing, you talked about the importance of passion. This is a simple but maybe not easy question. What would you say in your activities is the root of your passion? What are you really passionate about in what you're doing right now?
So I have a fundamental belief that you can only be good in things that you're passionate about, because I don't let myself be forced by anyone. Like, that does not work, right? So like, let's just assume that this is true for the moment. So what am I passionate about and what am I good about? So I could, for instance, imagine, like, so I always had a lifelong dream of being an astrophysicist. And the problem is I have dyslexia. I have trouble with understanding long form documents. I don't understand, I cannot comprehend math as easily as other people. And I still think that I could be passionate about it, but I cannot put the work in. Like, I just can't. Like, this is really too hard for me. Like, this feels too difficult for me. But the thing is, when we talk about what we are passionate about, and this is jobs theory, why do you play tennis? Like, you can satisfy a couple of different jobs, right? So I could play tennis to earn money for my family because I'm just so good at it, right? Like, but it doesn't give me that much joy. Or it is something that I want to do with my spouse, just to spend a good time with my family, like to connect more. You kind of have to ask yourself, what do you enjoy about the things in life, about the things you do? So when you talk to someone and say like, oh, she's a head of product and she's a head of product, that does not mean that we're both head of products because of the same reasons. Maybe we just landed in it, we have to do it, like I need to, right? And the other one is like, no, I like the technical challenge. So to answer your question now, I am an exceptional problem solver on the grand scheme, I feel like, like on the strategy side, but I'm extremely bad at other things, such as working in the very, very, very detail where it actually matters that you are so super, super, super precise. So when I write my guides, and I know that Scott is a fan, right? So when I write my stuff, all I do is I write for myself. I write for myself that I would understand it in the first pass. So this is why it is also structured and so kind of information dense, because I struggle with the opposite. You will also notice that when you read my stuff, I've never had formal training in writing, by the way, but you will see when you read and look at my stuff, there is no big blurb of text. There's always line breaks everywhere, because this is how I read. I have trouble comprehending text that is just, there's just no line breaks, but it drives me crazy. And this is something to do with just how I process information and what I'm passionate about. And this helps me also to look at things in product management. I'm very good in breaking complex problems into smaller ones and then slowly addressing them piece by piece until the bigger one is kind of solved. And this usually happens on the visual side. I guess the more interesting question is like, what would I do if I was not in product? I could imagine all kinds of jobs, because, everything that has to deal with problem solving, like I feel like I'm a detective some way, I'm trying to find specific things. I also know from myself that when I play games, for instance, like card games or board games or whatever, I always go for the strategies that nobody expects. And as soon as they work, they're not interesting for me anymore. So I'm by nature a disruptor. I try to find things that are efficient in ways that others did not think about it. And that's just what I enjoy. I love understanding constructs where you put a lot of people in, which is organizations, right? So like, and I really, really, really do enjoy that. And it gives me joy that people are validating me, so much that this seems to be striking a chord somehow. But I also need this affirmation, because otherwise I would have my imposter syndrome telling me that I'm not good at it. So, it's a good relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I read this book some time ago by Alain de Botton, who wrote a book called I think it's called A Job to Love.
Mhm.
And the point he was making, and hence my question on what is the passion in what you're doing, was that when people are young, they want to become astronauts, firefighters, whatever, the typical stuff. And and the idea is, what is it in these jobs that actually is yielding the passion? What is in that job that's really that you're interested in fact? And it comes back to the jobs to be done kind of thing again. It's what is it that you're actually trying to achieve through this desire to become a firefighter or something. And as you know, in the real world, not everyone can be a firefighter or an astronaut. You can, the gist of this book was that you need to find what it is in those things that you can maybe find elsewhere, and you can transpose because the actual essence of what you're interested in and passionate about, you can find elsewhere also. And I thought that was a very maybe obvious for other people, but I thought it was a very enlightening kind of thing for me anyway.
There's a very interesting episode by from the Huberman Lab with Dr. Maya Shankar. So she used to be a world-class violinist. I think, as far as I know, I don't know her personally, but so she used to be a world-class violinist, and then I think she had an accident or something, and she could not perform it anymore. And she also went through this journey of trying to figure out what was getting me up in the morning and making me practice so hard for this. What did I love about the instrument, about the performance in an orchestra and so forth. And she went into behavioral science, of all the things,
Mm-hmm.
after playing the violin, now she's playing with behavioral science. And it really is exactly what you said, right? What makes you tick, and spending some time and really understanding what that is a worthwhile endeavor, also in business. I mean, if I know what I'm passionate about, then I can form a growth plan based on this, because then you don't have to ask yourself, what kind of job title do I want to have? It starts to become more of okay, in the next job, I want to be challenged on this and this and this area. And that was very, very difficult for me as well. So I was absolutely insufferable when I was dealing with a time in my life where I was just looking for, I just have to pretend now. I was beginning of my 30s. Oh, now I have to pretend that I know everything now, right? So I've seen everything, I know everything, I understand everything about product management after 2 or 3 years. So,
right.
And that's the thing, right? So why did I do this? I was afraid that people will not respect me otherwise, because I did not see it lived from other people as well. I mean, this is the sad thing in our professional world. Oftentimes, it is still not profitable sometimes, right? Or sexy to just stand there and just say hey, I'm a product manager and I don't know these things about product management. Can someone tell me? And this is why I encourage juniors and also anyone that is my direct report, frankly, to just bring me a growth plan that really mirrors what they have an interest in. And frankly, do not care whether it has to do with my job or with the job that we are doing right now at the company, as long as you foster this interest that you have, where you're also excelling at your job here in the company, then why don't you invest time in that? Because I know if you have this kind of balance with your two lives, that you will perform better at work, and you will also appreciate that. So just looking at the topics of what you do is a bit one-sided in that sense. So yeah, that was a very long agree to what you said, Jonathan.
I think one of the scarier aspects of this is I've been sort of obsessed with this concept of our identity. How we, what is our identity? Is my identity a product manager? What is it? We so often associate our identity, at least to some degree, with what we do professionally. And I think that's why it can be this imposter syndrome, or when we're seeing somebody else do something poorly, they think we're good, oh my gosh, is that me? It's if I'm not good at this thing that I think I'm good at, or that I've dedicated time to, it's your very identity is threatened, which is about it as terrifying and threatening a thought as I think you could have.
Yeah, it is.
I don't know. How do we navigate that?
Well, not, I mean, yeah, I'm maybe not the right person to talk about that particular topic, but I think we tend to sit sometimes in rooms and think about, we're very, very concerned about our own image that we project to the outside, right? So like, should I say this now? Should I not? Should I wait for the other person to say something? You know, like this, we're so social, like we're trying to kind of weigh in our options and this and that, right? Like some people are doing it in a malicious way. Some people are trying to just, like, they're just scared or whatever. It feels to me that oftentimes we sit together in groups, everybody's looking at themselves, and they completely forget to look at the others, right?
Yeah.
Because we're so concerned with our self-image. I'm not a stranger to that feeling. Absolutely not. But I feel like it starts to get a little bit easier with, I don't know whether it's age or whether with the increased exposure that I have, I started to kind of understand. So because this concept of identity is very interesting, because you have a different perception of me than anyone else in the world. Like every one of you has a different perception, right? So like you cannot give me my identity. That's not possible. So at the same time, I should kind of derive it from the opinions that you have and then kind of put it together with what I think about myself. And it is interesting because to some people, I'm a celebrity, right? So to some people in product management, I am a celebrity. You know, they tell me how great I am. They put me on a pedestal and so forth. And then to other people, they don't know me at all. But it is interesting because you kind of can compare these two things. And then you're just like, that's how this feels, right? And it doesn't feel that good. It doesn't feel as good as you thought it would be. Like it does not fulfill you in some way.
Right.
And in fact, it's actually quite uncomfortable for me quite a lot of times. And that's not a humble brag in any way. I'm just saying that once you kind of get into this is the reason why people who are, I don't want to say successful, but like people who are more exposed are keeping to themselves because they know exactly how that feels. You just want to be treated like a normal person. You want to burp, you know, like you want to burp in the how do you say, like in the company of someone else without being like observed all the time.
Yeah.
And it gets tiring to stand always on stage. So I could not imagine what a Mr. Beast, for instance, is going through, right? Like he cannot go anywhere anymore. And I'm not even close to a smidgen of this level, but depending on where you go, like to conferences or some other stuff, you kind of start to understand like, okay, this is an interesting thing. But to your point, like, what does this do with your own identity? I think ideally you have to get to a point where you are happy with yourself and then just put that out. And it kind of, the difficult thing is to just say like, hey, look, even if you don't like me, that's not changing the picture that I have of myself. And sometimes I have days where this works better, and sometimes I have days where this works not so good. But especially as someone that is more senior in a company, this is sometimes very, very difficult, because it was inconceivable for me how it feels to be a leader when you have not been a leader. You know, like it's very, very difficult to imagine what that is, right? So like you kind of have this picture of like, oh, this is a person that is now a leader or an executive or whatever. But once you're in it, you kind of start to understand what made the job so difficult for them, because it's not at all what you think it is. It's just different, but people also treat you different. So therefore they kind of change their perception of your identity.
Right.
And so I don't have a solution at all. This is a very philosophical one today.
I think it's for so many, LinkedIn is like so many things come together. It's like, you know, you're communicating things. I mean, not just you, but people are communicating things on LinkedIn. Like for what reason? I mean, to display your expertise, to ultimately help your professional standing in some way. And as soon as it's like anytime you give a presentation in front of, like, let's just say you had a big corporate gig and you're giving a presentation to the whole, whatever, your company. Well, the stakes are sort of high, right? It's like how well that goes, you know, could really impact your career. And now with LinkedIn, you're communicating something with a professional note, sort of through a professional lens to the world. And that's where it's like, well, to what degree is it okay to say FFS? To what degree is it okay to share something personal? To what degree is it acceptable to, just to be, hey, look, here's a big mistake I made, blah, 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 blah. It's almost a paralyzing thought when you're communicating to the whole world. and it's not just, and I think deep inside, I think we just sort of most folks have the need just to be creative and to communicate and to share. We want to share the ideas that we have. But as soon as we're on LinkedIn, it's like we're not in the coffee shop. We're not just it's not necessarily a safe environment, right? I mean, the stakes are something higher than zero.
And this is a thing that we especially see also in business relationships, right? So like if you have something to lose on the other side, then authenticity is in danger. What does that mean? Like if I am an employee of yours, if you're my boss, if I start to say certain things, there is a danger. Did you take this in my next performance review, which will influence my salary, which will influence this and that? And this is why I say as well, like I encourage people to have, if they can, not everybody's that privileged, of course, but if you can, have diversified income streams so you can speak open. Because one of the things that I can do right now at Jua as well is like I can speak up to my CEO. I'm not afraid of him. Not that he's an intimidating person. It's just I know from experience that when you cannot afford to lose a job, when you cannot afford anything in life, then you're going to make mistakes in the jobs where you're at.
Yeah.
Why? Because you don't want to risk it. And that makes you actually a worse operator. And it's not to knock people. It's just the nature of things because we have this kind of strong relationship. And this is why I love working in product, because most of the time as an operative product manager, you do not have direct reports. That means that the people that are talking to you in the team, they can be open with you because you have no power over their jobs. And that's what I don't understand. Like people just always want to be managers. No, you don't. You absolutely do not want to be responsible for 3 growth plans or like 4 or 5 direct reports that you have. Our current head of engineering right now, just to the structure that we have, has about 6 or 7 direct reports. That's not fun. It's not fun. It's just not fun. And but we somehow convinced ourselves that the path to management is the path that's worth it. I don't know.
Yeah, Jonathan said, for kids, we want to be cowboys, firemen, astronauts. I don't remember any little kids saying, I want 5 direct reports by the time that's what I want to be when I grow up.
I want
to do performance appraisals.
There was actually a guy in class that was called Boban, and he said, like, what do you want to be when you're big? Like, he said, like, I want to be a boss. I want to be a mafia boss. Like, okay. Don't know whether he made it.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. Well, it's been quite a year for you. Now, if I heard the story right, a year ago, you were at 500 followers, more or less. Did I have that story right?
That's pretty correct. Yeah, it's exactly 1 year. Yeah, on LinkedIn it was 500. Yeah.
So certainly there's been so much here. One of the biggest things is consistency and creating a habit. Where did you get that inspiration when you started this? Where did that initial thought come from? It obviously was a successful strategy.
For the strategy, I don't know. Like that one I worked out with time. I just knew that I'm going to do this was my method of working. Like I was already far into my growth mindset, and I also knew that I want to do advising, and I also knew that I am not good with outbound, so I'm not good with like advertising myself to people, like just like, hey, can I advise for your company? I don't really enjoy that. So what I want to do is that people are coming to me and say like, hey, Leah, I know what you're about. I was reading your stuff, right? The product-led growth. Yeah. So there were a couple of people that were extremely important for me, and also company strategies. So in terms of the dry stuff, like companies that did this really well are HubSpot. HubSpot does a really fantastic job on like creating a brand that is really solid. And this is not about deceiving people. It's about product-led growth. This is why I love this topic so much. Like it is about authenticity. It does not pay to trick people into anything. Yeah. And the other people were, for sure, Elena Verna. She is probably the closest friend that I have that kind of embodied this role model of where this can go, because she's a very, very clever way on how to package content and write about it. And she showed me that it is possible. Now we have very different, like we have completely, our personalities are like this, right? She's very organized. She's very precise. She's very introvert. I'm also an introvert, but like a little bit on the other side. I like going on podcasts, for instance. I love auditory visuals and so forth. And she just showed me how this is possible. And it definitely also helped that she's a woman in roughly my age, you know, because for me, it was always very, very difficult to kind of find role models, to just see that this is kind of possible, because it was a man's world in tech, like the tech world in general. It was just impossible to imagine that I could do any of this. And I also did not think that I have a voice that is worth hearing. So I started that experiment, and she did not care at all whether I had 10,000 followers or 20,000 or 30,000. She was talking to me since I had 500 followers. And don't know why. I have to ask her, actually. I have to ask her. No, I don't. Now I ask myself, because you don't have the bandwidth to talk to everyone. I know she didn't, but I'm extremely grateful. And she was definitely the one person that influenced me the most. And I'm extremely grateful and just like blessed to have met her in that sense. Yeah. And now we're friends. So, you know, sometimes it's funny because you do find friends over LinkedIn, whether you believe it or not.
Yeah.
It's also a dating portal, apparently.
That'll be our next show.
No.
Dating secrets for LinkedIn.
No, that's not a good one.
You know, the biggest thing, I mean, she showed you that it was possible. That sounds like a huge, massive thing. She showed you that it was possible. I mean, it's be hard to be motivated to do much of anything if you didn't feel like it could result. And she showed you that it was possible. I feel like that's a huge,
you know,
that's a big
it is
thing.
interesting. It is very interesting, because I've been also extremely, I feel like, how do you say, giving with my time to other people, in the sense of like, you know, engaging with them, even if there's no immediate business or whatever. Like I'm not that opportunistic. I'm just like, okay, you know, I talk about topics that I find interesting.
Yeah.
And the interesting bit was, I talked to dozens of people, and I've also tried to teach them what I do. And there's very, very few people, like 1 in 30, maybe I would say, of people that I engage that really want to and will put the work in on a consistent basis to better themselves. And this is why this entire relationship also kind of worked. She's not doing any work for me, but she corrects me, course corrects me. I course correct her when I see something. And this is just, you know, we're kind of workhorses. We just do our stuff. We're extremely consistent. We're extremely hardworking in that sense. We know exactly where we want to go. And we sometimes do course correct, but we're not, how do you say that? Like we're not drowning in self-pity. Why is this not working? Or why is this not working or something? Like we're always like trying to find ways to get through, because this is a hard job. I'm not going to tell you that this is easy, even if you're consistent, but consistency is the one thing that you need as a table stake before you can think about any other efficiency frameworks, as weird as it sounds. Yeah.
Makes perfect sense. If you could go back a year ago, give advice to yourself, what would you say? What would you tell yourself?
Oh my Lord, that is a difficult one. I'm someone that always lives in the future, in the sense of like, you know, or like in the present, even if possible. Yeah. I don't think I did that much wrong. I think I did the right things. It would be foolish to say that I'm not privileged in what I do right now. Like it is insane in a year. It was a lot of work, sure, but I was also incredibly lucky. I mean, I don't know whether this is possible anymore if you just start from zero now. Everything has changed with AI, you know, like how we present content. Everybody's now a PLG advisor for some reason. So like I have about 50 more people who are doing the same.
Yeah.
And that's the downside of inspiring everyone to do it. Everyone will do it. So
you've driven interest in your product category, meaning PLG as a category.
I exited PLG actually a little bit now because of this, because there's way too many people that are around this. Like what I talk about is product-led sales, right? So like bringing both together, like sales and product-led growth. And we definitely feel that this is the future, and this is also where almost nobody can follow, because it's a very hard skill set to get right as an advisor and a consultant.
But I also feel like that's something that so the fact that you're being so generous with your content and your guides and so on, so everybody who hasn't should check them out. But I feel like that's how we kind of operate a little bit. is the more transparent you are about that stuff, the more it pushes you also to develop it. I mean, if you for 1 second believe that it's your 5-step guide that makes you successful, I think you're already on the wrong kind of track. And if it's for one moment you think it's the tool, right, that is the kind of the key thing behind it, then I feel like you're already lost. And the more I mean, okay, there are a couple of things that you probably can share, and if you're a company, that's a different question. But in terms of content and the way you think about stuff, the more that's at least my experience, the more I put out, the more it also challenges me to, well, I need to rethink it. I need to think it further. And that's something, yes, they can copy, others can copy stuff, but they will never catch up on the thought process. So I don't mind if others pick up the same thing. I mean, it's even great. It's validation. So thank you very much. But they will never have gone through the same kind of loops and hoops to get there.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I think, like in the way that I'm doing it, I mean, I'm not just like doing this just for fun as well. Like I also earn money with it, right? Like, let's just be clear on this. Yeah. But this is a differentiation from me to others.
Yeah.
It's just like, it still blows my mind. And I love the attention in this regard that I get from people. Like when someone writes me an email and tells me that they tried something out and this is what worked and this is what didn't work, like, in a 300-400 people gig, then I'm like, wow, that is, this is someone that sat down and read my entire 5,000 word essay on product-led growth.
Yeah.
Just sat down and they actually consumed it and they found it valuable. That is an incredibly flattering thing to myself, like to my ego in some ways. Yeah. And it makes me feel good. It's not sustaining, but I would be lying if I didn't enjoy it. And this is just validation of skill that I did not have in my life before. And I feel like I'm privileged in this regard. But as I said, it's kind of a little bit counterintuitive to what we said at the very start of the podcast. We should also reward people for their efforts, right? Like for their consistency that they put in, even if they are sometimes not as like, on the top of everything. Like, because how far can I go now? Like, can I go to 100,000 followers? I don't know. Is it worth it? I really don't know. I really don't know at this point. So it's kind of, at some point, it becomes completely meaningless. It's almost like a salary, right? Like at some point you just have the basic needs covered and then it doesn't really matter anymore where you're going.
Yeah.
I don't think it makes a fundamental difference whether you earn $1 million a year or $1 billion a year. I don't know. Like I don't earn $1 billion, okay? Just to be clear on this. And neither $1 million yet. Yeah, I don't know whether it makes a difference, but it definitely makes a difference whether you earn 10,000 or 200,000 a year, for sure. So take it for what you will.
I had a question relating to the activity of inbound marketing, or what used to. So inbound marketing, as you described it, getting people to call you up rather than you saying, "Hey, I'm here. Do you want to work with me?" About 10 years ago, there was a lot of like when HubSpot also came up, there was this other term. It was called content marketing, which is kind of related in my mind, at least. I'm wondering, how can companies? Do you think this is something that companies can do in a way that's kind of cost effective, or is this really for individuals, for real people like yourself?
If you want to do this as a company, that's a very good question. I love this question. So like if you want to do this as a company, what we used to do is exactly what you said, right? So like we used to do content marketing and we hope that some brand is going to emerge from it and then people love the brand. I think these times are largely over. Sure, you still have some brands that are, big and you kind of like them and so forth just because of the content that they produce. But by and large, I think a lot of products that will move towards community-led growth, which is kind of like product-led growth with people. So, like the people around you and the communities that they build are becoming more of that. So what I mean with that is, let's say you are having, you want to sign up for HubSpot. And then there's this Discord server that you can go on, or the Slack community where they just talk about HubSpot, where there's other users with HubSpot. prior to this entire movement that we had now in the last couple of years, we were thinking about community as a more cost-efficient method of creating support. Like other users are telling others how they solve their problems. That's not really what's happening under the hood. What's happening under the hood is, if I have access to other people using the same product, I form bonds with them. They're very honest with me. They're not representatives. They have no incentive to lie to me. Some people are a little bit combative, like about brands for some reason, but you know what I mean? Like Microsoft versus Apple and that kind of stuff, but that's not what I mean. Community-led growth, or like communities in that sense, building communities. And I'm building a community right now about my own brand, if you want to call it that. I mean, Lenny is also doing a fantastic job on this. Just as a good example. That's how you have to approach it as a company, if you can. And even for businesses, this can make absolutely sense. So I can give you a good example so I run courses on Maven, and by all intents and purposes, I'm a business there. And there is a creator community that we have on Slack, which is very, very interesting, because the people there are also conducting experiments, like on the system, and like, hey, here's what works and here's what doesn't work. None of the content that the company themselves produced, and they do produce it, of course, but like none of the content that they produced would have given me the trust in these results as someone that kind of does the same courses that I do. It's in the same age bracket. It kind of talks to the same people, like all about this stuff. So community and forming trust through people is extremely important and becomes much, much more relevant in the future. And I think that's how you create a strong brand. If you think about it, I'm not a big fan of Tesla anymore because of Elon and what he's doing and yada, 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 yada. But like, there was a time where Tesla was really, really cool, right? Because people were driving around in Teslas and so forth, and Tesla drivers were greeting each other, a little bit cringe, but like they were doing this, right? It's like it was fashionable, right? So like, how do brands become like this? The product needs to be, at least in some areas, really revolutionary, like bleeding edge, or like really, really good. But there also needs to be some kind of strong association from people to talk about the product and really to also recommend it. So even HubSpot is a very emotional topic for me in some regards. Like there's kind of like this professional emotion around things. I do care about what's happening at my job. This is not just about, oh yeah, now just take a different CRM. It's not what this is. Like, we spend 8 hours or more every day in our jobs. So why wouldn't it matter greatly how I spend this time? I don't want to do stuff that just annoys me all day. So I think communities around this, and especially complex products, is a very powerful thing. And I think that's where it's going. But to answer your question on how you're doing this with content, if you cannot form an entire community, then you need to make it at least so that people can engage with you honestly without having some kind of fear of repercussion. So for instance, I'm always a little bit hesitant about reviews, like also on Google and stuff, like someone gives a bad review, someone spit in my coffee, and then the company is starting to respond. That's not what I mean. I just mean, like, in the end, you need to do the same as a person. You need to produce consistently good content that gives someone a better day on their work, or is moving them forward in their career. There's no way around this. And you can in some way automate this. In some way you can't. But the very few brands can really do this in the long term, I feel like, just with pure content.
That was a bit of my experience, and the reason I asked is, if you want to sell the idea of doing inbound marketing to brands and companies, it's quite an uphill battle, because there's a lot of upfront investment. Okay, you went very fast building a nice community in less than a year, but how many people are posting every day and maybe not getting the same kind of results? Although maybe you would say that's not the case. If you're posting every day, you would get these results. But there is a fear, if you're thinking, okay, if we're just talking about communication and marketing, should I do an ad, or should I, and then do Facebook ads or something? Or should I now write an article that I'm going to spend 8 hours or whatever the amount of time is researching and doing like a really good article that I'm going to put on my website? And not only am I going to do it this week, but I'm going to do it every week. maybe we should hire someone to do this. So it immediately becomes an enormous budget. And I think reasonably, you can never be sure that there's going to be results. So typically companies will prefer just saying, well, you know what, I'm just going to do Facebook ads. It's, I can see the results. I can do this. I'm not going to, so how can you justify that, doing one or the other? And that's,
yeah, it's a very interesting question about how do you make a predictable pipeline that is coming into your business in whatever form, and that is extremely difficult to do, because if it was easy, then everybody would do it, and then it becomes hard again. So this is the thing, because it is so hard at the start to build something like I did. Like the first 6 months were not a lot of fun. I was trucking around on like 600-700 followers, and so it was not fun, right? Like I had no reactions to some of these posts. The reason this is kind of the reason, because it looks so hard from the outside that you then think that this is going to be so hard in the future. You cannot imagine the scaling, right? Like, and this goes back to this point that I said, we have trouble imagining the future of also a business on how it scales in the future. Now, with classical business functions, we have kind of arrived there. We do know that a company that is running at 1 million revenue, which is not a lot for, 20, 30 people, that this is not a lot. But we do know from performance from other companies that if the month-on-month growth is on a consistent climb, that in a couple of years, this will result into a DCF calculation that results in a very high, good, buyout. We kind of know that. But we're not really extending this also to our channels. Now, it is also very difficult, right? Because sometimes you can do something for years and it just does not yield any result. That is true. There's probably a lot of Leahs out there that did not make it. Let's also be true about this, right? But it depends on how much competition that you have and whether you're aware of what you do is really special. Because if everybody starts to do what I do in the tone that I do and the speciality that I have, then it's not profitable anymore. It's just what it is, because then they will undercut me by $1,000 per hour. And, then I have to also lower my prices maybe. And that's just how the market works. So in essence, what I'm trying to say is that things that are easy to do and have obvious value are not profitable. Especially if you compete with others, right? If you compete with others, because that's just the nature of it is. But things that are seemingly hard but profitable, they're probably worth doing. It's just what it is.
I think a challenge for a company is finding a voice. And what I mean, so I think that is kind of an additional challenge in the sense that one of your, let's say, moats as a content producer is the voice you bring. I strongly believe this also through a mistake. I made a mistake in my previous company where we very consciously made a decision to not have a voice. And I explained the reason. So we had a company making films for other companies, and a lot of the people in that space were kind of very arty and not very, we're not very quote unquote serious, although that's probably not true, but it's just what we had in mind. And we really wanted to build, let's say, a serious company where we productify, or whatever the word is, the service, and make, where people could come to us and really know what they get, and we can guarantee a certain level of quality, etc. And in hindsight, I think it was a really big mistake. It was a bad decision, because in this space, if you productify, whatever the word is, there's like a product that doesn't have a clear return on investment, where it's and there's a strong emotional component where it's very hard. Of course, people make videos or make content in order to increase their revenue in the long term, but it's very hard to connect a piece of content to the revenue you create. On the other hand, you can directly see a piece of content and say, well, I really like that, or I don't really like that. And this is a clear metric that people use. And if you do the same as everyone else, you will find someone in the end. It's kind of what happened to us. You will either companies will start doing it themselves, or you can find people in the Philippines who do it, for 1/10 of the price, and you have nothing, no moat, nothing that can, keep you. And if you're in a kind of artistic space, which I think making content, there's kind of an artistic component to it, then you want people to say, well, this is Leah's content. I can recognize it. There's only Leah that can do this kind of stuff. And I think you will lose some clients. For example, we would have lost some clients in the short run because people say, well, we really don't like this style or whatever. But you would, if you find people who like what you do, then you're basically made for a long time. So I think this idea of having a voice is really important, and that's why I see a kind of challenge also for companies to do this more inbound marketing. It's not impossible, but it's something to bear in mind, I would say.
I think what this is a positioning game, right? So like what we're trying to do is we're trying to position ourselves in something that makes us special. And the weird thing about it, in difference between people and companies, is if I leave a company, I take my brand with me. Right? So like I take the brand with me. So I can have as many jobs as I want, but I take my brand with me. With a company, it's kind of different. So what does a company identify themselves with? Or like how do they create a company's identity? You kind of have to do it with something that changes all the time. And what does change all the time? It's what makes you special in the market. So the identity of Uber, for instance, in the market was at some point completely different than what it is today, because there's just now more competition. Also, the classical taxi services, they're starting to wake up to actually what was happening and so forth. And that's kind of like the challenge, right? This is not up to the content writers to find the voice, or like to have a really good content writer, even though that does help you, of course. But it is to kind of figure out with the market what makes us special. Because if you have 5 attributes to yourself, and all of them are average, then you should be very exceptional in one of them and be a little bit shit in the others, because you can sell yourself on the first one. I've talked about this with Gaurav Vora from Superhuman on my podcast about this. And he said specifically, look, our product is secure, but we're not talking about security. This is not what we're doing. We just make emails extremely efficient. And that's our differentiator, because Gmail is garbage, right? It's just not efficient at all. Like this entire interface just drives you crazy the entire day. And that's what we're selling ourselves on. We could also start to advertise in security, right? But that's not our voice. That's not our identity. And you have to have some kind of mechanisms where you kind of figure out if these needs change. You also need to change your voice, so you're not losing your brand equity in the market. Yeah.
Let's talk about your company for a little bit. What type of companies would be your ideal clients, and what problems and type of obstacles would they have when they come to see you that you're best suited to help them with?
So typically it's a company that has a product that either has a self-serve motion already in place, or will go self-serve. So like something that has a trial, freemium, whatever. Usually these are B2B companies. So I work mostly with B2B. Tech, SaaS, scaling somewhere between 15 million and 100 million of revenue. That's usually what it is, because anything that is much, much younger, like for instance, I don't know, 2 to 3 million revenue, these are startups that they don't pay you any money. They just give you equity and then they just go bust the year after, which is fine. It's fine. But like, I don't want to do that.
Right.
So I need to have leverage on a lot of teams at the same time. So there should be some kind of product department, of course, or a big sales organization that wants to kind of learn how to create good products, because that's essentially what I'm doing. So when I look at the people that I have in my cohorts, then very interestingly, about 70% of those that want to learn about product-led growth are from sales-led companies. So these are sales directors, product directors, VP of sales, VP of product, head of growth, that kind of stuff. And that's quite interesting. So classical head of growth positions are also quite interesting for me to advise on, because they are usually coming from the marketing side. So how do we scale growth demand through they product-led growth kind of puts on its head. And they come to me and then I advise them on it, either through teaching or through advising. So B2B SaaS above 15 million. That's usually my ideal client with some form of self-servable product. Yeah.
Is the sort of goal that you would be able to work with them for a season and sort of get them up to a speed where they're sort of up and running on their own? Or is it more like, is that the idea?
So the average number, so we ran the numbers lately, and it is interesting. There is a number that I can tell you that seems to be kind of an average that plays out through one-on-one coaching and company coaching as well, and advising.
Yeah.
And that's 10 months.
10 months.
For some reason, 10 months is kind of like the time where you either are happy with Leah and then you find someone that does the job now for real, or the company has internalized what they want to do, or they did hire someone, or like I helped them hire, for instance, a head of growth or someone to do it internally, because you cannot afford Leah for such a long time
Right.
like on an advising contract, when you could have someone doing it full time in that role.
Right.
And so it usually comes down to 10 months. So ideally, a good mandate is one that goes at least 4 to 5 months, because then we see the impact.
Yeah.
Anything shorter is usually not that good, I would say. Yeah.
Tell me more about that. So it takes about 4 to 5 months to see an impact, like with revenues, I presume you mean?
Revenue would be nice. That's if you have some existing motion, right? But like if you talk about a sales-led company that is doing product-led growth for the first time, you kind of have to sit together with everyone to just define like, okay, so what is customer success? How does this look like?
Yeah.
And then the first month you just spend usually helping them how to structure their onboarding process, because that's usually what every company wants. So Leah, can you help us with our onboarding process? Should we make this trial paid? Should we make it free? What should be in the plans? That kind of stuff. This is very actionable advice. Yeah. And usually with time, then we also start to structure more like on the retention side. So, okay, from all the fast optimizations that we did now from the outside, what makes a good product, right? So like, what is your positioning? What are your ICPs? How do we kind of restructure also in the company how product development works? Yeah. So that's the second priority that we usually have. Yeah,
that evolution, that makes sense. I have to think there's a lot of companies looking for that, looking for that assistance.
Yeah, so far they do, and I'm happy for it.
Well, as you're getting started, not getting started, but as you're, we say, ramping up with sort of full time with your own gig, what are some things you're excited about over the next year?
Holidays. For sure. I'm looking forward to just being able to sit down for like 6 to 7 hours on a Sunday and just write one piece. Yeah. I couldn't do this for the longest time. I haven't released a guide in months. Or lately, well, I mean, that's not true. Maybe, just like not that much. And time is a blur. But that's what I'm definitely looking forward to. Just like to have this really focus on my own business and see what happens. You know, it's a very unpredictable business. You never know whether you're going to end up with a good year or a bad year. Yeah, I don't know. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking mostly forward to just writing and having time for myself. I'm a big loner. That's sometimes comes on podcasts.
I would think with the full-time gig not there, that you would have, that would sort of bring with it a burst of energy, rest, creativity. That seems like that would bring, obviously there's uncertainty things as well, but it just seems like that would just provide whatever this thing you've been doing for the last year. This seems like that would be like, it's going to only accelerate.
I for sure hope so. And I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, before we wrap up, anything else you'd like to let folks know about? Have we worn you out?
Be yourself. Watch that documentary about Stephen Hawking. I don't know. I think it was about Hawking radiation. No, not much. Just like keep on being led by the product. It is about trust in the markets, and it's about authenticity. So honesty is probably the way forward to profit and laughter. I don't know.
Yeah.
That was not a good closing remark.
Well, your posts often make me laugh. I very much you know, I realize I say this a lot, but I don't mind repeating myself. But it's truly great quality, and that's why I'm just sort of amazed at how you crank it out. But it's very it's very entertaining also. So that
Thank you.
Look, it's, you know, one of the things you said is, which I think is absolutely right. It's like sort of your talent that sort of defines your ceiling. And then, but then your effort sort of, but there's no guarantee of getting there. What came to mind when you mentioned that was like, we have this phrase, well, that person's the Michael Jordan of this, the Michael Jordan of that. To me, what that means is there's somebody that had an extreme high talent and also put in extreme high work. That it's the Michael Jordan of this because because he was lucky in a sense that he had some, you know, some God-given abilities that he didn't have anything to do with, but he also put in the work on top of it. And then that's where you get truly the best in something. Well, anyway, well, thanks so much, Leah. It's been it's been amazing. It's just been we just enjoyed speaking with you so much. So you can find Leah at leahtharin.com. That's LeahTharin.com. If you follow you'll find on the Product Quest podcast on LinkedIn, we'll post links to Leah's site, and just follow her on LinkedIn. We're fans, as you can tell. Also follow her on Twitter or X. Yeah, you had a very funny funny meme about the number of people that follow you on LinkedIn versus on Twitter one time.
I just don't. I'm just not active there.
Yeah,
I can't.
I'm gonna tell people to find there anyway. LeahThar. Leah, thanks so much for being our first repeat guest, for sharing your expertise with the world in such an entertaining way. We're fans. We hope that you'll also be our first third-time guest at some point.
Yeah, I cannot wait to return to the Product Philosophy podcast. And
oh, that's a good name.
Yeah, you should.
And that, friends, concludes today's Product Quest podcast. Follow us on LinkedIn. Reach out anytime. productquestpodcast@gmail.com. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much, and have a very nice evening, all of you. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye-bye. Thank you.